Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Humanities, SOH, Diploma Postgraduate Diploma Programs, PG Diploma in Book Publishing, PGDBP, MBP 002 Editing and Prepress, Block 1 Ideas into Books 1, Unit 1 Kinds of Editors and Kinds of Editing, 1.0 Aims. In this first block of this course on editing and prepress we shall be talking, as you already know, about the importance of editing a text, the reason why texts need editing even if they have been produced by an expert in the field, and the reason why there is a need to proofread a text even after it has been edited in this unit, the first unit of the first block of the first course. We shall introduce you to the field and scope of editing, the kinds of editors and the kinds of editing they do. At the end of this unit, you will be able to describe what is meant by the term editing, list the various kinds of editors, times list the kinds of editing they do, and discuss the field and scope of the entire activity of editing. 1.1 Introduction. Editing is one of the least taught but most widely practiced media skills. This program on copy editing and proofreading guides you through each activity involved in transforming a typescript into printed pages and includes techniques for correcting spelling, punctuation, and page layout. The first question we anticipate arising in your mind is, with so many electronic word processing programs which offer facilities for spell check, finding synonyms, correcting grammar, etc., why does one need to learn editing? Let us quote from the poet Pope, "True skill in writing comes from art, not chance, as those move lightest who have learnt to dance." 1 point to field and scope of editing. What do we mean by the field and scope of editing? Editing a text or document means making it worthy of publication by working on its content, organization and presentation. Editing, thus, may be said to be the art and science of transforming a manuscript into a printed medium of instruction and communication. The field of editing is vast and any and every document needs to go through several stages of modification, improving with every stage, and rare is the document that has been produced in a swift rush of inspiration and found acceptable by the target reader or user. Editing need not necessarily be done by an outside editor. Every writer rereads and rewrites what he has written in an effort to express himself completely and clearly. Precision and accuracy are the keywords if the writer or author is himself editing his work. However, even after he is satisfied, the manuscript needs to go through screening of various kinds and for various purposes so that it is acceptable, firstly by the publisher, then by the distributor and crucially by the reader. The scope of editing would cover all the activities encompassed by this effort to transform the manuscript. Right from the moment the manuscript arrives at the desk of the publisher-editor, whether it has been solicited, commissioned or merely sent for consideration by the author, it has to go through a battery of tests. Even after the publisher has found the manuscript satisfactory, he may need to ensure that it is in conformity with the policy of the publishing house as regards format, size, shape, tone and tenor of text, etc. Thus, every document needs to be, eventually, edited by professionals who will give it the final layout and shape. An editor is a person who acts as a bridge between the reader and the author. He is answerable to the publisher of the book, newspaper or journal. He has also to discuss and suggest changes with the author, particularly if the text is a creative one but also if it is technical or vocational. In addition, the type of editor known as copy editor also interacts with the printer, giving him instructions about the production of the final reduction of the copy. 1.3 Classification of editors. Editors can be classified in several ways. One way is to classify them by responsibility: a chief editor, a sub-editor, a copy editor, and so on. Another way is to classify them by the nature of the editing they do: creative, substantive, and copy. With the modern facilities for word processing, many of the editor's tasks are either getting simplified or converged. Authors were, earlier, instructed to use new typewriter ribbons, send the top copy to the publisher, retain a carbon copy, etc., etc. With computer printouts, every copy is a clear copy, and the master copy can be retained either on the author's machine or on a removable drive, compact disc, or pen drive. You will learn more about the use of electronic editing tools in Course 4. It is difficult to generalize or have rigid compartments in today's electronic publishing scenario, since editing is a responsibility shared by many persons in a publishing house. In fact, the process of editing may be said to begin when the author goes through his own manuscript to check it for errors, inconsistencies, facts and figures, statistics, etc. However, we will need to have some working definitions to proceed. You will find them below. 1.3.1 Editor-in-Chief. The editor-in-chief may not necessarily do the editing per se of any text that arrives at his publishing house. Once the manuscript has arrived at the desk of the publisher, he usually contacts his own in-house editor or wears the hat of the editor himself in order to decide whether to accept or reject it. The publisher or the editor-in-chief sets the policy and supervises the entire operation. He may be responsible to ensure that the nature, tone and content of the publications are in keeping with the overall policy of his publishing house. 1.3.2 Sub-editor. In the case of newspapers, there may be one or more sub-editors who will decide what will or will not be published. These may have various nomenclatures: the managing editor, the city editor, the wire editor, the news editor. Sometimes the sub-editor and the copy editor perform similar tasks. 1.3.3 Copy editor. The PO. It is the copy editor, however, who will make the final checks for quality and accuracy. Further, the copy editor is responsible for interacting with the press with regard to the look of the final document or book. For this purpose, apart from a wealth of experience in the field of editing, he needs to have a good general awareness of the work around him. Especially the publishing scenario, suffice it to say that the copy editor owes obligations to the reader, the publisher and the author. As such, he may be said to be the kingpin of the entire process of publication. 1.4 Qualities of an editor. Since you are new to this course, we would like to tell you that you would find us repeating the same thing several times over as you proceed. Repetition of information presented earlier is deliberate and meant to reinforce what we have said already. For example, the duties of an editor will be repeatedly talked about. The duties of an editor will vary from time to time and place to place, but the qualities or qualifications desirable in an editor will not vary too much. Harold Evan, former editor of The Times, London, lists the qualities of an editor in his book Newsman's English thus: human interest qualities, sympathy, insight, breadth of view, imagination, sense of humor, an orderly and well-balanced mind, implying judgment, sense of perspective and proportion, a cool head, incapable of getting flustered, quickness of thought and accuracy, conscientiousness, keenness and ruthlessness, rightly directed judgment, based on well-informed common sense, capacity for absorbing fact and fancy and expressing them in an acceptable manner, adaptability, able to see from author's point of view, knowledge of the main points of law of libel, contempt and copyright, physical fitness, and last but not least, team spirit. 1.5 Kinds of editing. We have mentioned earlier that one of the ways of classifying editors is by the kind of editing they do. Editing could be content editing or language editing, formatting or copy editing, or sometimes merely proofreading. In the West, ghosting or collaborating have produced a number of good books. As an editor, you will have to be on guard against a, usually irrepressible, desire to intervene and rewrite whole sections of text which can well stand on their own. This is a creative aspect of book editing and brings together people who have a lot to say with no means to say it and people who speak beautifully but have nothing to say. Irrespective of the degree of responsibility within the publishing house that an editor may have, he will have to decide on the degree and nature of editing a document with him may undergo. By this, we mean whether the editing will be interventionist or education of author by proxy. Editors of technical documents discover that most technical and scientific writers have only mannerisms, not style. The nature of editing done by technical editors draws no attention to itself but presents the facts and arguments simply, clearly and unambiguously. They try to leave untouched any writing that has a personal flavor without being either impressive or verbose. In fact, unobtrusive editing is a desirable quality in each and every editor. Spelling, style, references, persons writing in a language not their first language, etc. are some of the issues editors will have to handle, irrespective of the school of editing they belong to. Therefore, at the outset, be prepared to handle unforeseen texts and be on the lookout for unique usages only as they will provide the training ground for you. So what degree of editing does an editor do? Editing may be said to be of three types: times editing for content, 1.5.1 editing for presentation of content, and editing for presentation editing for content. This is a responsibility which should be undertaken in close collaboration with the author. Usually the author is either an authority in his or her field or a creative writer. Insofar as subject or content editing is concerned, with experience most editors tend to develop specializations through experience. Editing for content in academic texts requires checking out facts and figures, conformity to requirements of the syllabus or course of studies, and checking for degree of difficulty which includes terminology and lexical items. 1.5.2 Editing for presentation of content. While editing for the physical look, the presentation of content is basically the domain of the copy editor. The content editor too suggests deletions, additions, and/or changes in the order of presentation of information so that the information conveyed is a coherent whole. Changing the order of paragraphs, suggesting where more or less matter would increase readability is equally the domain of the content editor. The copy editor will decide on letter size, font, typeface, margins, etc. in order to make the page look visually appealing and readable. In fact, he knows what margins to leave for the binder, etc. and makes provisions for them. 1.5.3 Editing for presentation. Highlighting of important points, giving headings, how to introduce the subject, or where the point is overstressed would need to be done while editing for presentation. 1.5.4 Language editing. Editing for language or style is a sensitive area and the editor would need to acquaint himself with the style of a particular domain or discipline. Technical texts, scientific texts, and literary texts all need to be handled differently. 1.6 Guidelines for the content editor. We shall be discussing subject-specific editing later on in this program, but we shall briefly touch upon the domain or field of content editing in this unit as well. No editor will go through a manuscript, used interchangeably now with TypeScript since hardly any publisher would consider handwritten submissions nowadays, in order to see if it is publication-worthy. He will, Most probably, scan a synopsis to see if it fits into his scheme of things. Then he undertakes a cursory reading when the first few pages help decide the fate of the manuscript. However, he may decide that the reputation of the author, the requirement of his publishing house, or the subject matter demand that he devote more time and effort to the screening. There is an unwritten rule that what does not interest the editor cannot interest his reader, since he always carries his reader along with him. In other words, the editor here is the surrogate reader. No content editing should be done until the author has been duly consulted or his acquiescence taken, unless the text is a commissioned one. The author has been given the brief and scope of what he is to write about. It is assumed in a commissioned text that the author is an authority in the area, which is why he has been asked to write. Therefore, it is always a good idea to cross-check before modifying the content of any manuscript. Content editing or general editing of the sort we have been talking about here needs a responsible attitude, expertise in the field, and experience with pen and ink editing rather than word processing prowess alone. 1.7 Guidelines for Copy Editors. What is a copy editor? A copy editor is a person responsible for producing a well-organized and consistent book for the reader and a complete, self-explanatory copy for the printer. Normally, the chief editor in a publishing house issues guidelines to copy editors of manuscripts accepted for publication. However, since you may be on your own or work in a concern where you are expected to take responsibility right from the word go, we give you below a brief list of responsibilities you may have to undertake. Naturally, as you proceed in this program, you will be encountering these in some detail. While working on the text, then the copy editor is expected to 1. Eliminate repetition and verbosity. 2. Break up long paras into smaller units or paragraphs. 3. Suggest deletion of passages and tables if inessential. 4. Delete hyperboles and superlatives. And 5. Watch out for grammar, idiom, spellings, punctuation, clarity. 6. Sometimes short paras make complex ideas unnecessarily simple. In such a case, telescope them for cogency and readability. 7. The copy editor should point out obvious errors even if the author is a subject expert. And 8. Decide spellings in advance or S or Z forms of verbs and conform to them systematically. Any rule is only suggestive and not prescriptive. The copy editor is also responsible for the physical look of the text, the margins, spacing, type size, bold or italicized text, etc. This he does with the help of symbols and marks, which are universally recognized by printers and not of his own devising. Do not worry about how to go about all these tasks just yet. We shall deal with them in detail as we proceed. 1.8 Role or functions of editor. An editor's job is both creative and self-effacing. Right from the beginning, it will save you much heartbreak if you do not see yourself as the author, irrespective of the nature and amount of editing you may have done before a manuscript sees the light of day as a printed book or magazine. Unless you are a freelancer, do not expect to get individual credit from anyone. If the author thanks you in his preface or the chief editor of your organization praises you, consider it a bonus. Even if you have done a wondrous job of recreating the manuscript, even the reader does not want to know that the popular author whose book he bought had not ended his book the way it finally ends. The ending of Great Expectations, for example, was changed by the editor. But the credit goes to Charles Dickens, not to the editor. An editor could be involved with any or several of the following activities at the same time: discussion with author regarding changes, referring to subject specialist for opinion, point consulting with production department regarding cost estimation, point discussion with sales department regarding sales potential, giving instructions to printers and layout department. And discussions regarding sales promotion. Normally, the roles are allocated to a number of people. As you can see from the list above, at any time there may be a number of books under consideration. One may have been accepted for production right away, another may need some changes in content, and yet another may have arrived from the printer and need to be distributed for sale. Obviously, a number of persons from different departments will be handling the processes. 1.9 Technology versus paper and pencil. Editors who have had their training in the days of paper and pencil alone, with the help of a couple of good dictionaries and a thesaurus, are now becoming rarer. It is the misfortune, so to say, of those who merely have access to electronic editing tools that they have to rely on inputs of creators of editing software. The copy editor has talents that cannot be replaced by computers. Anyway, you will see later that spell checks and other tools of word processing programs are not 100% reliable. It is, therefore, essential that you go through the discipline of paper and pencil editing before you encounter MS Office and its enchantment. Even if you have done a wondrous job of recreating the manuscript, even the reader does not want to know that the popular author whose book he bought had not ended his book the way it finally ends. The ending of Great Expectations, for example, was changed by the editor. But the credit goes to Charles Dickens, not to the editor. An editor could be involved with any or several of the following activities at the same time: discussion with author regarding changes, referring to subject specialist for opinion, point consulting with production department regarding cost estimation, point discussion with sales department regarding sales potential, giving instructions to printers and layout department. And discussions regarding sales promotion. Normally, the roles are allocated to a number of people. As you can see from the list above, at any time there may be a number of books under consideration. One may have been accepted for production right away, another may need some changes in content, and yet another may have arrived from the printer and need to be distributed for sale. Obviously, a number of persons from different departments will be handling the processes. 1.9 Technology versus paper and pencil. Editors who have had their training in the days of paper and pencil alone, with the help of a couple of good dictionaries and a thesaurus, are now becoming rarer. It is the misfortune, so to say, of those who merely have access to electronic editing tools that they have to rely on inputs of creators of editing software. The copy editor has talents that cannot be replaced by computers. Anyway, you will see later that spell checks and other tools of word processing programs are not 100% reliable. It is, therefore, essential that you go through the discipline of paper and pencil editing before you encounter MS Office and its enchantment. It includes suggesting how key terms, abstracts, statistics, tables and illustrations may be better presented. Suggesting how greater clarity and precision may be achieved by revision of style is also the responsibility of the substantive editor. The substantive editor may, if his organization is small or not rigidly structured, interact with the press, in which case he has functioned as the copy editor as well. Copy editing can be done before the manuscript goes back to the author, in case the agreement made between the author and publisher so demands, so that the author can see the changes made or suggested. Alternatively, editors may prefer to return manuscripts to the authors for revision before copy editing. If the copy editing is done after the author has revised his manuscript, the major changes made or suggested must have the concurrence of either the editor or the author. There are certain advantages in these stages of editing which have not been theoretically devised but which have evolved over a long period of experience, experimentation and practice. 1.10.3 Author clearance. The advantages of having all major changes cleared by the author are 2. 1. If any further changes are necessary, it is cheaper that the author makes them before the printing process begins, and 2. Credit or blame for the content of the publication rests with the author. Copy editors or editors who alter a manuscript can modify the author's intended message by mistake. You should also be careful about issues of structural reorganization, expansion, shortening, titles, etc. 1.10.4 Copy editing. The press charges for all corrections made after the initial stages, and the publisher usually passes them on after a certain minimum have been accommodated to the author. If the copy editor can show a dummy to the author too knows how the final book will look, size, shape, feel. Proofs. A proof is defined as a first printed copy of something, for example of a page of a book, that is made so that mistakes can be corrected before more copies are printed. Collins Cobbled English Language Dictionary. While there are many other persons who contribute to the production of a book or a journal or newspaper, we shall look at their responsibilities at relevant points of this course. 1.10.5 Proofreading. Proofreading, showing the author the proofs, has two advantages: eliminating author's copy editor's mistakes and eliminating printer's errors. Most large organizations have proofreaders too, but they are not required to be too educated and qualified. Mostly, they check proofs against copy. They do not and are not expected to intervene and make corrections. Of course, they are not machines but men, and after a certain length of experience, proofreaders too can catch obvious errors and point them out. 1.11 Summary. In this unit we looked at the various kinds of editors, classified according to hierarchy and according to responsibility. The kinds of editing that the various kinds of editors do were also briefly discussed, so that later on, where you look at their jobs with a view to acquiring some of their skills, you are able to associate that task with the post. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.